So you can please state your name and your birthday.
I'm Thom Mayne, and I was born January 19th, 1944. I can't remember how I ended up here, but I think in LA, it was just sniffing, and you had kind of a sense of where the creative world was at the time in Los Angeles. And LA is a Midwestern city. It's a very conservative place. Everybody came from the Midwestern. In fact, statistically, it's Iowa and Indiana, and all that kind of thing, right? Anyway, it was kind of understood in LA that you're going to be in Silver Lake or Venice at that time. It was just known that that's where the creative world was. Writers, music, artists, architects, etc. I ended up over the bait and tackle shop in a little apartment, but it's like 100 at the pier on Washington Boulevard, and I'm above the bait and tackle shop, and it's maybe $150 or $200. That's part of the deal. It's inexpensive, and I'm a struggling architect, and I'm broke, and I'm etc. It's doable, and I just showed up there. Because I remember the first thing I did is took all the cabinet doors away, painted the whole thing black, and kind of made my world. And again, I'm this guy that's just left this young marriage, and I'm starting my life as a single guy, and I'm 24, and my memory is I'm buying dishes and pots and pans and learning how to cook and that kind of stuff, and I had my first little kind of place. And at that time, it was just, it was kind of amazing for, again, who I am. And I'm in Venice now, and it is Venice at the end of the 60s.
What do you mean
And the beaches were topless, and it is counterculture, where you're about to meet a whole bunch of people that are part of your world, art and architecture in my case. And it's people of that group which needed a certain lifestyle, which was also economic. You could afford to live here. And at that time, this was pre-tourist, the tourists were weekends. Gold's Gym, nobody knew about. I was working out there, and it was just a funky little gym. And Schwarzenegger was there, but nobody knew him. This is the beginning of everything. And it was actually on Pacific. And Dupar's was the cafe, and that's just where you ate. And you had a laundromat, and you had places that knew you, and it was still local. You lived here. And the various cafes took care of the homeless. Because I still remember very particularly going to certain places, and one guy would get a coffee and toast, and it was very personal still. And there was a ratio of types of people here. And it was sketchy, because after the bait and tackle shop, well, below that, I forget the name of it now, the bar there, it was a biker bar. And I had friends at USC, it was a school of architecture, that wouldn't come to social events to my house and would definitely not go to the biker bar, because there were times things happened and stuff, right? And it was kind of sketchy. And but at the same time, it was just completely comfortable. You were young, you were ready for that, and it was filled with really interesting people, and there was a vibrancy that it wasn't even kind of you were conscious of it. You just took it for granted somehow. It's where you found eccentricity. The characters that showed up at the boardwalk reading poetry and doing music and that whole scene. In the beginning, it was really lovely. It turned into something else then as it got more commercialized. And again, it was the epicenter of the 60s, 70s, and so it was filled with that particular form of at the time, whatever the broad notion of counterculture, and so it was definitely connected with a political, cultural, social glue that connected the whole place. Variations. I'm not saying it's so similar at all. Variations of that basic kind of sensibility was a connective tissue, which all had to do with a resistance and the basic kind of tenets of what was going on in the 60s that had to do with kind of reconfiguring the nature of our culture and the nature of of what it meant to be part of this culture. And and definitely kind of opening it up and relaxing it a bit. And again, it was all endemic in music and film and in the arts of all types. At that time, it was accessible to young people. The demographic would be quite on the low end age-wise. You'd have young people here, a huge lot of young people, because it was accessible, right? And that certainly had a lot to do with it. There were a whole group of us here, and we were all in our middle, late 20s, etc. And we were all in the middle of or the beginning of our exploration of our own work. And again, like Berlin, at a certain period of time before unification, it was a fascinating city because everything was subsidized. There was only artists there, and it was a really weird city that had this huge number of musicians and painters and sculptors and et cetera, right? Because they were all subsidized, right? And this place was kind of interesting that way because it had kind of a huge ratio. Again, I assume you're talking a lot of people. It's an amazing amount of kind of artists, architects, writers, et cetera, were living in Venice at the time. Doug Christmas was his Ace Galleries. He's opening up galleries, and he is a kind of a Robin Hood character that literally discovered most of the key characters that are now accepted as the most serious artists in the 20th century. He was giving them their first show. Actually, we ended up using one of his buildings for the 72 Market Street, which I ended up being the architect for. But he was using unused commercial buildings. The absentee tenants would take them and make them into galleries. They weren't his. Just occupy them, paint them white, and have shows. But it was Heiser and Turrell and Irwin, these major characters, right? And I remember, wow, this must have been in middle 70s. I'm seeing the scrim piece by Irwin on Market Street, and he just takes these buildings and just uses them, Doug. And it was just it being one of his kind of major pieces, and it launched him as one of the major figure in art. And then right next door was Turrell, and there were these three digging kind of these holes, which again, I think was one of his first big shows. And then I think it was Heiser. He took the Bank of America, and it's empty. He just takes it, paints it white, takes the door down, puts this huge boulder. I'm across the street. I'm going to see the show, and the police came to shut it down, and he didn't care because he didn't have any building permits and all that kind of stuff. And it was just, there was that kind of stuff going on. And I remember I was teaching at the time at SciArc, bringing my class down going, these are guys that are really experimenting, and architecture's kind of dead right now, and you got to be looking at the art world to look at the kind of questions they're asking. It all kind of added up to a certain kind of energy because there were these multiple things kind of taking place. And then, of course, there were the certain people here, a lot of which are now kind of really well known, because Frank Gehry has a little studio, and he's just a small office, and nobody knows him yet. He's doing little houses. He has a little studio on Brooks, and Craig Hodges and Robert Ray-Gurian had another place, I forget, right in front of the parking lot, and Coy Howard was here, and again, the whole huge art scene was here. It was never better time in my life. I'm 2 blocks from the ocean. I have this incredible, I have a 4,000 foot space that I have for myself. I'm paying $350 or something. It's something I can afford to live in. And I have this kind of community around me. I have my cafes, and Rose Cafe, I was going there since it's open. I think it's 72, 73, 74. These two Indian guys that always, it takes them forever to choose a chair. It's my living room. Literally, when I see people today, they expect to meet me at Rose Cafe because they're so used to me. And breakfast, I was at the Rose Cafe for 3 decades. That's my morning. And then Frank was there, Peter Alexander. I could rattle all the characters, Ed Richade, all the characters that showed up. And it was kind of a scene here. And it was a cultural place. It's not a restaurant. It was a part of a community, all right? And Venice was that. It was right. It was just amazing in those terms, and it just was at the right place. It just took place at the right time. And again, it's this unique thing. You're on the ocean. It's Venice. there's a housing stock, there's industrial buildings. Like I'm in an industrial building in my studio. And so it's the right type of environment for the kind of people that are coming here. And it's available. And it's kind of empty. It's waiting to be filled with something. And it was just this right time, right place circumstance that takes place at certain times that you can't control. Because again, what was going on with, as these people showed up, and there was enough of them, came the other institutions, the cafes, and that were the connective tissue, right? That were part of it, making it a community. And then again, it was just kind of weird, maybe it's very LA, both isolated and hidden away and community, and it's some complicated mix of that. Because I think most of the people I knew, we all thought we were kind of hidden away, and it was kind of very private. We had our own little studio, and we had no interest in a dress or a place. You had to kind of know us. It was very private. And yet there was this also, because there were a group of people here, there was some sort of an idea of a community. But it's a very unusual kind of mix. It's not one or the other at all, in my mind. It was this really combination of a privacy and the connectivity that came maybe with the cafes, and the fact that there are some sort of critical mass of people that are interested in common things, meaning broad connective tissue in the artistic community between film and painting and sculpture and architecture, et cetera. There was a commonality in resistance, because that what I said, that would have been one of the absolute commonalities of that period of time, that all of us were resisting a found culture, and that resistance was the beginning of a creative act. And represented the community itself, represented a resistance to the norm. It was the beginning of a process where architecture isn't what I do, architecture is who I am. Make sense? It's not a job. It's what I do. The pragmatics they're secondary. Out of that comes an ability to support yourself or to deal with the pragmatics of life. And it was a community that would basically be a commonality. My own development artistically came from living life and absorbing it from multiple places, and that would be definitely what we're talking about here. That was the thing that really formed me, were the things we're talking about that came out of this experience, where this was part of that experience, or this centered it in many ways, because this is where I was. This is where I spent my time, and it was my schooling in a way, or in the sense that it was the thing that formed me, or helped form me, more than school.